Okay, last week we looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, and what it did was try to bring up a number of ways that you have to think through some of these things in order to be true to the text, and then make sure we build upon that. Okay, and so just to remind you that what we noted was that this was a command that was given, it was something new, and that is part of this that showed you that in a congregation that had been around a few years, that there was something special about this particular command, that it did illustrate that you can exist as God's people and do everything that was required in those early days, that sometimes you don't have money, you can still operate as God's people and as a congregation. Now, that brings us then to the question of, all right, well then why now does he introduce this? And what does that mean for us? And that is the key, because what I think sometimes we do is we oversimplify in order to have to avoid going into the depths of all the reasons why. Okay. He's commanding them in 1 Corinthians 16:1, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. He is mentioning specifically about something and a need that had arisen because of a famine in Judea that they were going to be collecting to provide for. So then he prescribed a method. In verse 2, on the first day of the week, gathered together already, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. And so the method in order to address this need is on a basis of when you are gathered together, as you gain the means possible, that's as you've been prospered, you take that, from that, you set some aside, put it, essentially the word treasuring it, on a regular basis, so that as it builds up and collects, there will not be a need of everyone trying to scramble to try to gather something, go home, find whatever is laying around, what extra do I have left over, in order to contribute when Paul arrives. That was the strict way in which you walk through that. But now, I want us to look at then what he taught us in terms of principle here. And therefore make the right application. Because sometimes we go in and we say, oh boy, you mean I don't have to give? That's not what it is? No, that shouldn't be the lesson you learn, but rather it's all the reasons why are actually built upon stronger principles. And the first one that really matters for us is to understand the principle of need. The reason why this exists is because there was a need that was best satisfied by collecting financially. And that there are a number of things that you just can't satisfy another way. For them to be able to travel then with it, to be able to take, if it was a famine, okay, what's the best way to handle famine? The problem is lack of food, so we could send, I guess we could send some chickens, but it'd be harder to make that trip, wouldn't it? And that principle I mentioned last week, that even the Lord recognized that with the sacrifices under the Old Testament, about a principle of exchange, and that in order to meet that need, and that was proper, okay? So what that leaves us with is to understand that so long as there is legitimate spiritual need, and that is to accomplish what the work of the church is, then it's on that basis we should give. And that actually is important to tie us in terms of spiritually and emotionally to what we're doing. This is why I think that this matters. If we only think of our giving in terms of an obligation, a timely obligation, then we're missing out and we're just ending up giving, and we're losing the heart that is at the core of it. The whole idea is there is a need, and on the basis of the need, that you will respond to help with the need. Now, with that in mind, if we're to do with the wealth that we enjoy, and we're looking at what can we do with that, the best use of it, okay, that's what a budget is. But everything in there is designed to meet some need associated with what the church should be doing. In that, rather than having everybody individually trying to satisfy those things, and you throw up a kind of an idea of, okay, we're going to just go out and we're going to teach Bible class. Well, there are many ways that we could do that. Everyone can just do things on their own. And now we have time put together materials, and that some people will take money in order to get materials. Why? Because there's a need for edification within the lower, the younger ages. And that would require that to be best suited for that. Same thing as what you would do for evangelistic materials. Is it necessary for you to have to use anything extra to be able to teach somebody the gospel? Can you do that with just an open Bible? I hope so. I hope so. But there can be other things that are helpful in order to do that. Different kind of fishers of men, or back to the Bible, or a number of kind of places, things you could go put together, but you have to kind of purchase that. That costs some money. Now, everyone could do that on an individual basis, or we can do that collectively because that's the work of a church, and provide that so that people can do that who maybe cannot afford, could be purchasing those things all the time. There are good things that need to be done within a community, people around us, but we are, on an individual basis, sometimes limited in terms of what we can do to help a particular need. But collectively, we can accomplish more. Okay, with all of those things of what is a legitimate need in order to accomplish the work of the church and any activity of the church, then, according to the need, then giving is appropriate. And that the method prescribed is the way to approach that, for all the reasons it gives. That is, we don't wait around because we know that there's a need. And it's the reason why you look ahead, you say, here's how much we're going to need, and we lay that out and say, here's why we're going to need this much. So when we're looking at why they gave, it was, here's the best way to accomplish this need. It requires money in order to accomplish it. And the best way, the way that he says is the way for the church to do it, is for the church members to give that, and to do so in a way that they are aware of it weekly, providing as they get opportunity from their own income, so that it is a regular idea of contributing to the work, rather than just did somebody have something and I'll show up and do something? Because that's not going to be enough. So there is a practical element to this. There is a spiritual element to this. There is a fellowship element to this. There's an emotional element to this. Okay? Surya? Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. It's just, the only reason I didn't bring that is I was sticking with the text. When you go over to 2 Corinthians, that comes up. Okay, and matter of fact, that is more the core aspect of when he's talking, because he deals more in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 with the heart. Because when he's doing the follow-up to this discussion and concerned, okay, because there's some people had come in, preview of the idea of 2 Corinthians is, people had come in to try to challenge Paul's authority. And listen, and that idea of, as he is trying to address some of the issues in the past, goes back to the issue of the man who taken the father's wife. They handled that well. He is addressing that. He's talking about, here's all the criticisms about him as to well, you see how people are treating him. Why would you listen to him? He does that in the middle portion of that early part of the book. And then he comes down to 8 and 9 to address this issue, that lest you somehow decide that because you're thinking less of me, that you're not going to give. And so he goes down into talking about the heart of giving and why you should be preparing, and puts a little bit more pressure on them in that way to understand that they need to follow through on what he said to do here, because they had a waiting around, procrastinating approach. Essentially, one of the things you learn, you putting those two together, is don't procrastinate, but you have that chapter 9 verses 6 and 7, but the nature of that gratitude should always be there, and therefore your gratitude always should be there, the need's always there, and therefore giving should always be there. That's kind of the connection that he's doing in putting all those things together. Okay, so that's a good question. So that's essentially how he lays this out. Now so you have two kind of elements that are sometimes approached. I want to see the difference. Sometimes we look at it and say, okay, well, we give because we're supposed to give. Okay, that can be true, but it lacks the heart that we need of why we're giving. That this is something that we're giving to really promote what makes the church alive and well and working, active, and here. Okay? And to connect you to that. That your giving makes all that we're doing possible. Okay? Could the church exist without that? Well, yes, but Eddie'd have to go out and get a job. I couldn't stay and do mine. We couldn't do all that kind of training without something else, without some other support. Okay? We'd probably have to sell this and find another place to meet. So there are all sorts of things that are needs, okay, that you can say, we can eliminate the need, drop down the need, and then the question always should be is, because you're dealing with expedience, is does dropping down the need to nothing, where we just do everything on our own without, does that end up producing more? Okay, and that's how expedience works. Is that a better option for the work of the church to go on? That's why you're trying to connect those things. Okay, but you can start with that in. You can also go over and say, well, here was the specific way in which they handled it, and it just was because of another instance. Some need came up, and so there shouldn't be any giving unless some special instance comes up of benevolence. Okay, and now you're stuck and say, well, what about everything else? After all, Paul had already argued in chapter 9 that supporting a preacher to work was authorized and a right idea, but it's not covered under this. So how was he to receive that, if not under the same principles of need, provision, wisdom, stewardship, and looking ahead? All these same things. So what you find here are the principles laid out about how you are to judge any kind of thing, and therefore the best way in order to accomplish those goals based upon an example of one particular thing that is established here in this chapter. So what you end up with is an understanding that it's not simply a matter of routine, I must obey in a very strict sense this, okay, though there's another way I'm going to get to it that's required. But it's understanding principles. And when you get and you find the difference, for example, we must remember that the way in which the New Testament was written was designed to be, not that it doesn't have specific commands, but it has at its root a lot of principles. And that the principles are important so that you're ready to apply them when the specifics are not there in Scripture. The principles are still there, and that because you've incorporated principles into who you are, okay, then it becomes you. That's why when Jesus was asked about what was the greatest commandment in the law, he went back to two principles of love. Whereas what they were used to seeing was a detailed legal approach to laying out each individual thing, and we're going to now put them out and layer them out in priority of what I'm going to do. Instead, he says, it really comes down to who God is in his character, that all of this flows from that. And that our response then in love to him is in being like him and responding to what he wants in the same kind of character-based, principled way. Those things are sometimes very specific, baptism. But sometimes it's about help people, love your neighbor, teach the lost. Okay? There are a lot of different ways you need to do that. You've got to be able to care, understand the right idea, have a heart for the message, love souls and love God, put all these things together. Why? Because he doesn't want you simply being someone who is doing it because you have to. He wants you to do things because that's who you've become. Sandra.
The other aspect to it that I see too is, God's always got the plan, and we're supposed to be a family. And a family contributing together can do great things.
Yes.
And so it makes a bigger bonding when you know that your money, that you may not have as much or they have more, doesn't matter. Instead, the whole collection is more.
Yes.
We are more family.
Yes, it does bring you, it has a fellowship aspect to it and the family aspect. And matter of fact, I'd say that if you look in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse 8 through 15, that is exactly what he's laying out, is a recognition that you're there for one another, needs come up at different times in different ways, and it's everyone going ahead and thinking ahead and providing now provides for the needs as they come up, because that's going to shift. And you do that because you love God and you love your family. And you love those around you. But again, notice what that is. Those are recognizing needs that are spiritual at their core and not always recognized by even the people involved. That's what they are. So what has he done? He has talked about, why do we give on the first day of the week? Well, because this is the best time to collect that. Okay, everyone being together. Because we have a number of needs we need met if we're going to function as the congregation and doing everything we want to do according to the best way possible from what he's provided. And that takes money. The way we do it is by ourselves taking that seriously and being willing to plan ahead and purpose in our own hearts. That's again 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. And then bringing it together and having something that was individual set aside to become collective, so that now individuals' money becomes one thing, is what Sandra just mentioned, that can do more. Now, I want you to think about the fact that I think we get that. I don't think that's hard. I hope you understand that same thing is true of us without money. That coming together as God's people of what we can be, what we can accomplish, simply doing things together, and the strength that we get from that, the bonds we create from that, and the way in which we can have an effect on other people because of that. I hope you can see that from your interactions as people as much as you do of the collection of funds. Because all of that is based on the same thing. And when sometimes in certain quarters there'll be discussions that a lot of times center on the money. Okay? And I'd like to go back here to this pre-1 Corinthians situation to understand what it means to cooperate. That it is not simply a financial kind of agreement. It is an agreement of heart. It's a spiritual commitment to one another and a recognition that we are all God's people trying to accomplish God's task to take the gospel to the world and to be stronger and to present that as a united front of his family to the world that needs the gospel. And so when we start with the idea of no money at all, and how far can we take our cooperation that way here within the congregation or with others around us, that is the principle, Paul, the same principle upon which we can share money toward his ends. And that's a key element of understanding what he was getting here. So what do we have then? I'm going to summarize from a list I created that's on the handout. You give as a congregational requirement, part of belonging to a congregation to help the congregation, as a moral obligation, as a timely task, weekly according to what you've been blessed with, an individual responsibility, so it's not just collectively, okay, we do everything, but it's not me, it's us individually too. It's a reflective offering. I've thought about why I'm giving and what for. As a matter of stewardship, this is the best way to accomplish this end, and as a fellowship opportunity. This binds us together. All of those things are part of what you get here within this. So let's now move on to verses 3 and 4, which is really the core idea of that last idea of fellowship. And when I come, whomever you approve by your letters, I will send to bear your gift to Jerusalem. But if it is fitting that I go also, they will go with me. All right. Paul is so careful and cagey sometimes in how he will word something. He's always, notice this, and I think it's important. He always gives brethren, as much as he possibly can, an opportunity to do the right thing first on their own. And then to bring himself into it only as necessary. Did you see that in these two verses? He does that so many times. And there's just an element of knowing how to help people grow. People have to have opportunity to do something on their own if they're going to be able to grow it on their own. Otherwise, they're always doing it out of obligation, particularly to somebody else. But if we're doing it based upon, here's something that needs to be done for God, and people step forward, they've grown toward God, not toward me. And I love that about the way Paul presents that. But now we're getting on to this specific situation. He says, and when I come. So we're now back to the idea of the travel plans that I introduced last week as being a regular kind of part of what you would put in this portion of a letter. Okay, I'm letting you know, we know one another, I'm going to come visit you. But in this case, it's an official visit, not just a social call. When I come, whomever you approve by your letters. Okay, what is he implying here? The idea of approving by your letters. Do we do anything like that today? What do we call that? By courier, you're going to get really specific here. Bonded courier. Okay. That's true. I was not thinking that, but that is true. Yeah, you're wanting to show, the purpose of the letter is you're getting a letter to say, these people do represent us. And it's signed off on a number of ways. It's basically a letter of recommendation from the congregation that says these actually are real members of this congregation. They're not out committing fraud. They're not con artists. They come from us, and we're all together on this. And so the idea of approval is important, though. The idea of that they passed a test. So there's a character element to this, that they can be trusted. Now, what are they being tasked to do, these people? He says, I will send to bear your gift to Jerusalem. What is he asking them to do? Okay. He's saying you need to select some people when all this is done to take all that you've collected for this purpose and get some people you can trust with the money to go and take it to Jerusalem. Okay? So he says, it's going to be your choice. You choose how we're going to handle this. You choose. But somebody's got to take it. And I want you to note, could Paul, because in the next verse, he says, but if it is fitting that I go also, they will go with me. What did he not ask? He did not ask them to give the money to him to take. And you have to understand, well, that'd be a lot for Paul with all these congregations to do. That's true. How many people, though, traveled with Paul? I mean, it varied, but it was quite a few. But he did not ask them to give that money and I'll pick it up and, Timothy will take it. You send your own representatives from your congregation. Now, he had said he was telling them the same thing that he was telling the congregations of Galatia, and we find in 2 Corinthians in chapter 8 that he told the same things to congregations in Macedonia. What was the difference in a practical way of sending and having your own people take that gift? What'd you say? Accountability to whom? To the congregation. That's one thing. I think that's right. What else? Okay, they're representing the congregation. To whom are they representing the congregation? Where is this going? That's right, to Jerusalem. What is the thing that Paul is trying to help with in the broader context of all of this? You remember? Unity. That's right. Bringing Jews and Gentiles together. So if he can notice what he has done here. He has basically tasked what is mostly Gentile congregations or mixed congregations. Those that were associated with his work, which remember, we have trouble thinking about this. His work was considered suspect. He was the Jew who didn't want to be a Jew anymore. And he wants to be able to come back and to have these different people come and bring money to the church and essentially have Gentiles coming and saying, we collected this for you, our brethren. It was an act that was specific to need, but it demonstrated something deeper. That we feel a connection, and by implication, Paul is the one who taught us that you matter and that we are together in all this. And so as you come back and you see, and what's so sad is that Paul has gone through all of this work, and you see ultimately on the third missionary journey as he rounds all this up and then heads back, that when he gets there, he's hardly arrived, he's taken a vow, he's doing everything in his power to show, look, I know I'm a Jew, I haven't become a Gentile, I'm culturally a Jew, by heritage and ethnicity, a Jew, but the church is bigger than that. He gets there, and despite all of those efforts, the Jews start a riot in the temple area, essentially. And he has to end up being rescued. Rescued by Romans is kind of, you have to put that in quotes. They didn't exactly treat you like kid gloves. Okay, but that's what you see happen in Acts 21 and 22. But I want you to see the heart of Paul and the heart of these Christians, because that did come to pass. They did this. Paul's urging, his emphasis on this. Now, sometimes I think we get removed, and it's so big that we remove ourselves from this, we lose a little bit of the heart of it. Have we taken up very specific collections before because there's been some kind of disaster? To be given to people to send to the church somewhere where they can help. I hope that when that happens, that you really, your heart is not just, you're in that for, yes, the disaster itself, but for your brethren that you have never met, usually. They hadn't met these people. Now, what's interesting is to be on the other end of that, of when that disaster has happened to you in your community. And trying to work and getting calls. When we had a tornado hit in Cleburne, and we were fortunate with where it hit. There was damage, but we were fortunate. It was like right before the Moore, Oklahoma tornado. And so we had some needs, and we went out basically. Everybody kind of shut down what they're doing, and we collected and see who of the members needed help, and people would go out. We'd provide things, and some provided sandwiches for the people working and water, all those kind of things. Okay, and you go out and you do that a limited way. But then you also said that you get calls and say, "Oh, I heard you had a tornado," and to say, "Yes, we did, but we're handling that here. Can you send the money to Moore?" Okay, so you you look around and say, okay, so are we there to collect the money? No, it's there to serve purpose. And your brethren, you want to take advantage of your brethren and their generosity. But whenever there's been like hurricanes or fires, the different things that can go on, when that happens, I hope when you watch the weather you see going on, you will spend time thinking about your brethren there. Not just a national kind of, because we're exposed to so much, right? You got national news. In fact, you find it's international news. Well, guess what? We've got brethren overseas too. I don't know how many of you remember the Christmas Day tsunami. And how horrible that was, but there were a lot of Christians that suffered because of all that. Okay. So what you have with Paul is this sense of going, and I think about going down. Was it Hurricane Harvey that dumped all that rain on Houston? Is that the one, right? Which one was it? Okay, and going down, and since I part of going down and taking we collected all sorts of, they needed cleaning supplies because it was just horrible. So just taking a trailer load of cleaning supplies down, and you do what you can, okay? So you say, number one, if you have opportunity to be more specifically connected when that kind of thing goes on, I encourage it. Because it helps you understand the nature of how the needs are, and that it should never get to the point of where I'm simply giving to feel good about myself as a giver. Because I think that we can have that problem today. But rather to realize in ways that on my own, there's no way what I'm giving can take care of this problem. But together, we can. And what that does is it changes it and says, I'm contributing to something real. I am part of something larger than myself. And in these small little things, though, add up to doing something that's really valuable for people. That is really, when you put together this, and I know that it's just kind of all this implication. We have the broader stuff from Acts to help out. But he wants to make it more personal. You take some men, you choose them, write letters to show it's from your congregation, so that when that is taken over in their Jerusalem and essentially that bag is opened or whatever, there's a letter there that shows that these men are from Corinth, they're your brethren, and we want to help you because you're our brethren. Now, when you look at verse 4, but if it is fitting that I go also, they will go with me. What is Paul doing there? What has he said? He doesn't want to force himself, but it's kind of a nice way of saying, let's travel all together. That'd be the smart. By the way, if everybody's got a bunch of money, which would be the best way to handle that? Everybody travel the Roman seaways and byways independently, or kind of grouped together? I think maybe traveling together might be a better option. But he's got this sense of you see how he made it about them? It was about them. Paul was organizing one of the greatest, the first example of it, this great brotherhood-wide, essentially, or at least in an area, effort of relief for the church. And the Apostle Paul was finding a way for everyone but the Apostle Paul to get credit for it. And that's leadership. And its character. And its Christianity. That would have been perfect to end there, because usually the bells are against me. But we've got 5 more minutes. So we're going to move on. Let's take a look now in verse 5. Now I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia, for I am passing through Macedonia. And it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you, that you may send me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not wish to see you now on the way, but I hope to stay a while with you if the Lord permits. Okay. So again, we're down to some travel plans. Now, you do not need to ever memorize these travel plans. Okay? Oh, the most important verses in the Bible right here. Nope. But they are actually really important to understand what happens in 2 Corinthians. Because one of the first things he has to address is why he didn't do this. And there were reasons why that he couldn't follow through on his plans. And that itself is a very interesting thing, but probably a better discussion for 2 Corinthians. But he says, now I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia. So his plan is then to go through Macedonia. Now, for those of you not geographically inclined, if you're thinking about the peninsula on which Greece sits, okay, Macedonia is on the northern part of that, okay? And so you have Turkey to the east, and then you come across, and there's Macedonia in the north part, and then Greece to the south. This is Achaia is that lower portion. He's going to come through Macedonia. That's where Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea are. He says, I'm going to go there, pass through Macedonia. It's interesting. He says, for I am passing through Macedonia. Number one, they're part of this too, and you're not the only ones in this. Okay, they're part of this too. But then he comes down to verse 6 and says, and it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you. Now he doesn't promise, it may be that I will remain. You ever been in a situation though where you say may be and the person on the other end says absolutely will? I'm pretty sure if you're a parent, you'd understand what I'm saying. Okay, you can make maybe we'll be able to do this. Well, you said, I said maybe. Sure. That I will remain or even spend the winter with you. What does that tell you about him? Going to spend the winter with you. What does he want to do? Yeah. I mean, now you understand there's a practical part of this too, because in the winter, you don't get out on the Mediterranean. It's stormy, it's a mess, and you don't take one of those ships out in the Mediterranean during the winter. Remember what's going to later happen to Paul because they decided to do that, okay? Bad idea. So what do you do instead? You find a place, you stay there for the winter. Why? That you may send me on my journey wherever I go. What does it mean that you may send me on my journey? There you go. There you go. Good job. Yes, that to send you on a journey was not be warmed, be filled. Okay, it was you stay here, and then you would essentially take the responsibility for funding where he needed the travel for where he needed to go next. That was one of his plans, was saying, so there's actually an additional individual ask besides the larger ask for funds. He's asking for a provision for himself to help fund him as he goes, okay? Wherever I go. So it doesn't matter where that is, but I'm going to need you to help out. Okay, we know it's ultimately going back to Jerusalem. For I do not wish to see you now on the way, but I hope to stay a while with you if the Lord permits. What does he mean, I do not wish to see you now on the way? Well, we'll have to find out next week. Sorry about that, but at least we got into it. Okay, appreciate your attention. You have any other questions about any of that complicated discussion, but I felt was valuable for a lot of other reasons.